Welcome back to I Don't Need an Acting Class. Beginning July 21st, Milton will be teaching a 6-week intensive in New York City. Meeting one evening a week, the class focuses on the practical work of turning script analysis into performance. For more information, visit www.theactorlab.nyc. That's www.theactorlab.nyc.
Stanislavski used the word zadacha, and in the original English translation, it was mistranslated. It was mistranslated as objective. The proper translation is problem.
So what Stanislavski was saying is that every character has a problem. And this is really an important concept, and it's going to save your ass. Because to me, it's easier and more logical to say, what is my character's problem? As opposed to what is my character's objective. And I think no matter what it is that you do, no matter what level of piece you're on, if you look at what is my character's problem as a road into it, it then has a logic. Because then if you have a problem, you want to solve it. And that is something you say, oh, well, how do I solve the problem? Now, when you get really good at it, what you begin to know is that the problem is not a plot problem. And so when I say it's a soul problem, it is telling you the depth to which you must go if you're going to get to what is going on with a character. If you begin to look at what is the problem that my character is having, it also feeds into the idea of what plays are about. Plays are about conflicts. Plays are about difficult problems that characters have in the circumstance of the play. And what's important about that is that they are human problems. And that's why we recognize them as an audience. We recognize them as an audience because the problem that Nettie has is a problem about being a mother. Yes, certainly is a theme. But how do I handle my son who has changed? And so you sit back as an audience and you look at it and you say, oh, I get that. Think how many people I know in my life have changed and I don't know how to deal with it. I don't know how to handle it. And so the problem becomes something that is universal. And so that is one of the things that we're looking for. We are looking for what is the character's problem in this world that this play exists in. Because if it exists in this world, it exists in every time frame, every world. That none of this has changed. It really hasn't changed for a long time. In the history of the theater, the first plays that were the Greek plays, the relationship that the characters had was with the gods. So, and what we learned is if you fuck with the gods, you're going to lose. If the gods say you're going to marry your son, there's nothing you can do about it. And so the early writers and the early people were trying to figure out what is man's relationship to the gods. And I think life was probably easier when there were more gods because it was just, if there was a storm, it was easier to say, oh, I get it. Zeus is pissed off at Diana. And so you could explain things. Now it's more difficult to explain, but that's what they were doing. As time went on, and as the world began to change, and thinking began to change, we began to explore what is man's, human beings, relationship to themselves. And so that became the struggle, and that has been the struggle now in theater since the 1800s. And so the struggle then that we're trying to get to is the person in this circumstance who is having difficulty, who is having a problem, who is having a conflict. And you can almost cut to the chase if what you're doing is trying to figure out what's the problem. It's almost like I can go there right away. If I can figure that out, then I begin to go into a mindset that says, I see this human being in this circumstance with this problem. And so how do they deal with it? And that is what plays are about. I think the big news in realism is there's no solution. And that's also difficult for us to understand. This is another thing that Hollywood has ruined for us. We think there's going to be a happy ending. And there is no happy ending. There's just, what is the next phase of life? I think that we don't see the difficulty that these human beings, these characters are in the plays, in the circumstance they're in the world that they're in. So it's an important thing. I think if you want to do these big plays, and who doesn't, if you want to do plays with depth, if you want to understand the depth of the human experience, you have to understand all the colors that exist in that world. You want to get to an idea. And I mentioned it on Monday, but it is important to understand that a play is about something, and the play is about an idea. And it's about a universal idea. If I say universal idea, it is an idea that has existed for all times. The relationship between a husband and a wife is not just they're having a problem. It is a huge idea that has existed for all time. If we don't understand this, we think that the problem between a husband and a wife with a son coming home after World War II is a squabble. And we miss the difficulty. This is also a play about a father and son, and a mother and son. Huge ideas, enormous ideas. When I first saw this play, there's a scene at the end of it, and at the end of it, the father and son embrace. And I was in the theater and tears rolled down. And it was like, I thought to myself, my father has never embraced me. I mean, there is this father-son relationship that is historic and difficult. There's online you can find a letter that Kafka wrote his father. It's translated 14 pages in singles, spaced, typed, in the translation, explaining to his father why he couldn't talk to him. Kafka. That is the difficulty. But look, if we don't understand going into this, that these are difficult relationships. These are historically difficult relationships. And my job as an actor is to come up to the size of the idea, which is where my growth is. This is where I have to really begin to understand that if my son has been away at war for 3 years, it's huge. Build something that happened. Build an event that happened during the 3 years your son was gone. And we got from the little video that we looked at the other day, the woman was talking about how people in the neighborhood, somebody died, somebody disappeared. And this is where the research really helps you. The research really helps you because I can steal from that woman. I think part of acting is knowing how to steal well, what to steal, and really begin to get that. If it seems to me as if you were playing Nettie, that between rehearsals, you would go home and build a past and just do it as a monologue. Do it as a monologue. When Caleb was working on All My Sons, there is a past that is talked about when he lost all of his men. He was smart because he said, I can't build that today. And that's another thing. That's another thing. This is all part of acting. All part of acting is really beginning to understand what you can and cannot do at this moment. We're not just haphazardly building things. We're building them because I can build it and believe it. That's the reason I think if we ever did this play, God, we could work forever before we got to the first line, because it's so huge. It's so huge what these characters went through before the play starts. Does that make sense as a concept? I think Patrick and I are the only ones that talk about talking out, but just being able to talk out this monologue, being able to talk out what's going on with this character, and find something that you can believe, that to me is really the cool work. I love building the past. I could sit and build the past forever. When we get to the lines, I'm kind of lost. But boy, building the past, I kick ass. Because I just really, I love the idea of building it. And just finding these moments. And it also tells you, you'll never get it all. I mean, you will never get it all. There is no moment when you say, well, now what do I do? Because there's so much more that you can do. It's endless. You can go on forever. You keep it fresh by building something different every day. The point of this is that the facts of the play, and if we went through and listed the facts of the play, I'm not sure anybody should ever write anything down, but I think if I were to ever write anything down, I would write down the facts of the play. It tells me where I need to start. Because the facts of the play are only interesting if they stimulate you. World War II is a dead fact until you have the experience of World War II. And then you say, oh yes, now I own World War II, or on some level. I always thought that the worst line in a play is if somebody had a line in a play that said, I had a really rough war. And I said, that's when I give the part to somebody else. I'm not in the mood to build a rough war. But that's part of what we do. That's part of what we do. We look at the facts of the play, and the facts get us to thinking. So if I say, I wonder what it must have been like to be a mother in World War II. Well, she didn't know where her son was, and she didn't hear from him. And she didn't get a letter. And she didn't get a letter. And another day, and she didn't get a letter. My God, what must have gone through this woman's mind when she didn't get a letter, and she didn't get a letter, and she didn't get a letter. And then there's a fact of the play that the Mullins boy died. The idea that I'm going to build the moment when I heard that the Mullen boy died. If I decide to build that event, then gives me something. I always think it is very useful for us when we are building something like that, that we basically sit and say, in this etude, I am going to build the moment that Nettie heard about the Mullen boy. And so then I do this improvisation. I talk out what went on. And then if you're really smart, once you've done it, you'll evaluate it, figure out whether you got it or not. It's a very difficult part of our work because this is where we learn. We learn when we sit back and say, I'm not getting it. I need to figure out why I'm not getting it. God, it is so important to know that you're not making great choices. Then you say, I've got to learn how to make better choices. I'm making the most obvious choices. And that's when I have to sit back and say, all right, I'm going to have to dig further. And if I dig further, I'll find something. And you will find something. And when you find something, it's like you love it. I think when you find a choice that you love, you go, oh, I love that. I love that. And then you can play the choice. And it's yours. You have to understand there is no Cliff Notes, there are no Sparks Notes called choices, because it's yours. That's the important thing. It is yours. And you have to dig around.